one particular night, it was like the sky was just showing us this beautiful picture show. And on the left-hand side, the sky was totally on fire, just this bright red. And the pictures that I got back, they look like they're doctored, but they're not. It was just this bright, beautiful, red and pink and so forth. And then on the other side, it's this beautiful blue and yellow. And we all just hung outside of our tents later than we had prior, because you do get to camp and you're tired, because it was just so beautiful.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and aren't I clever? Did you notice that I released the episode where we're trekking the Mummy Range on Halloween? Yes, I can pat myself on the back. That required planning. Anyhow, I loved learning about this little visited area in the Rocky Mountains that is now another thing on my list. The list keeps getting longer and longer as I hear from you as well. But if you're not into backpacking, even though this is a backpacking adventure that Paul is going to be talking to us about today, they do have 21 trails out of that area. Most are you would access via Estes Park, as she did, and they range from an easy 2.9 miler up to long trails like the 15-mile Grand Ditch Trail. And then they have this brutal, I'm going to say this wrong, Ypsilon, Fairchild, and Hague Summit. It's only 3.4 miles, but it's like a difficulty plus. You're going up and down over 2,000-foot elevation in that 3.4 miles. So it's pretty much straight up, and you're at altitude at over 13,000, I think it's 13,400 feet elevation. So within these 21 trails, they do have varying lengths and difficulty levels, although most are in the intermediate to difficult just due to the steepness and the altitude, but they do have something for everybody. And today we're going to be doing a really cool 5-day adventure where we're getting in the backcountry away from all the people, and both on and off trail. Of course, this is guided. But anyway, so without further ado, let's get on with the show. Can you start by introducing yourself and perhaps telling us your age?
Sure. My name is Paula Talbot, and I will be turning 50 this year in August.
We first met Paula back in episode 55 when she taught us about her trekking adventure in the Wind River Range. And as a recap, if you didn't hear that, she got into adventure travel about 5 or 6 years ago after she met a woman who was traveling the world solo, and it just opened her eyes to, hey, I could do things differently too. So she ended up going on a solo trip to Slovenia, and got hooked on adventure travel. And now she's getting bolder and bolder and taking a couple trips a year.
Thank you very much for having me back, Kit. I'm glad to be here.
Until I met you, I didn't even know anything about the Mummy Range. Where is it and why should we go there?
The Mummy Range is in Estes Park in Colorado, and it is absolutely beautiful. And if you've never been to Estes Park, you need to travel to Estes Park as well. The Mummy Range, I had never heard of it either, to be honest with you, and was traveling out to California to meet up with family. And it wasn't going to be a, in quotations, Paula trip. So I wanted to add a few days somewhere ahead of that so that I could get out there backpacking and again, look to wildland trekking to see what they had to offer, and landed on the Estes Park Mummy Range trek. And the area is just beautiful. And like a lot of the trips that I seem to end up on, not necessarily a popular one in terms of the amount of people who are on the trek with you, which for me, that's a plus. I like to trek somewhere where you sort of feel like you're off the beaten path and you and your group are the only ones who are out there. This particular trip was 5 days long versus the Wind River Range was 7. And it was beautiful. I had the desire to explore more in Colorado just based on my experience of Estes Park, including the drive-in from the airport. There's a really beautiful winding road that changes elevation and goes through different small towns and so forth on your way into Estes Park.
And so the Mummy Range is in the Rocky Mountains. So you're in the Rockies, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And so give us a little bit of an overview of your trip.
In terms of the terrain, the people?
The terrain, yeah, just kind of you said it was 5 days. So are you starting in the valley and going up? Or are you starting up in the mountains already? I've actually only been to Colorado once, and that was to Mesa Verde National Park for 1 day. So that's my sole exposure to Colorado outside of pictures.
Okay, well, this was my first exposure to Colorado. You do travel into, you're traveling up and up. They're driving you through little windy roads. And so you do, start out high, but you're definitely hiking up high too. And the terrain on this one was really varied. So yes, you are in the Rocky Mountains, but you do start out in the trees, and throughout the whole trip, you are traveling through all different areas. You're traveling through tree line. You are traveling across this vast, kind of looks like prairie, just filled with these small shrubs. And there was no trail in that particular area. But it was phenomenal, with the mountains all around you. There was a portion of the trip where you are traveling across this boulder field, and just everywhere, just nothing but rocks. And so from the standpoint of each day feeling very different from the day before, this trip had it for those 5 days. And I remember my favorite campsite during this time. You're traveling through the woods, the alpine forest, and you get to this area, set up your camp, and step right outside the tree line. And all around you in both directions is just this beautiful mountain range and a valley just the land is just falling off right in front of you, and rocks everywhere. And this one particular night, it was like the sky was just showing us this beautiful picture show. And on the left-hand side, the sky was totally on fire, just this bright red. And the pictures that I got back, they look like they're doctored, but they're not. It was just this bright, beautiful, red and pink and so forth. And then on the other side, it's this beautiful blue and yellow. And we all just hung outside of our tents later than we had prior, because you do get to camp and you're tired, because it was just so beautiful.
That sounds cool. And from doing a little bit of research, it looked like the range was first formed by volcanoes, but then the glaciers came in. So they've done their part. When they pull back and all that, they kind of rip apart the land. So it's got to be a really interesting landscape.
It really is. And like I said, it's just so varied each day. And one of the things that I have a hard time with on trips, I love photography. It's putting the camera away and paying attention to the hiking part of it. But I've gotten pretty adept at, holding the camera while hiking and snapping off some pictures, because you don't want to, while there's definitely plenty of stops, it's just that beautiful. You just want to kind of take pictures the whole time versus just, keeping your memories. You want to kind of see prints and share it with others. Try to relay what the trip feels and looks like through your photos.
Yeah, and the photos still never do justice to landscapes as far as I'm concerned.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. Doesn't mean I don't stop trying to make them convey it, but I wholeheartedly agree. There's a special feeling about being in the middle of it.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your group. This is a group tour, correct?
It was. This was the smallest group that I had. And wildland trekking, I believe that they pride themselves on the smaller group experience. So for this particular group, it was my son, in his 20s, myself, and then 2 ladies who had hiked the Appalachian Trail the year prior. And, they'd done that for several months. And this was their first backpacking experience with a group. And then we also had our guide, just one guide. And the ladies had such a wonderful time, as we all did, that they swore that they were never going to go back to just backpacking on their own, because they said that this was the way to go. And I was lucky enough on this trip as well to just really gel with everyone. And I think it was our last campsite, we were all acting so silly. We started putting the camera on like for it to take pictures of all of us. And we were just posing, including the guide, just being silly, trying to act like, we were, just total, and I'm going to curse, badasses out there taking our photos. Yeah, it was a really good group. And, I feel like I've only had a couple trips with wildland trekking, but if the guides that I had on both of the trips are any indication of the guides that I'm going to have moving forward, I will always travel with them.
I've heard nothing but good things about wildland trekking. And before I affiliate with any company, first of all, I reach out to them 99% of the time. But also I do my homework and I check with people that have gone on there. I check with Trustpilot. Out of their 300 some odd reviews, all but one were excellent, and that one was great. So it just says a lot for the company itself. I should note, too, that they are exclusively trekking. Almost always backpacking, but sometimes they do llama-supported and other supported hikes. However, you're always hiking, unlike other companies that I may work with that are multi-sport, where you might throw in some kayaking and biking and all that. This is strictly a hiking company that goes to some of the epic destinations around the world. Let's talk about food. Food's very important. You've got to keep your energy up. How'd you eat?
Wonderfully. Wildland trekking has just phenomenal food. And, some people, I think, maybe more purists or people who don't want their packs to be quite as heavy, kind of subsist on the, in quotations, backpacking food. And, you've got your granola bars and your, little snacks and, things along that, oatmeal, that sort of thing. Wildland trekking, you really do go on these backpacking trips and have a backcountry gourmet experience. I mean, I remember for breakfast one morning, we'd have pancakes, and then they had rehydrated berries and so forth to go on the pancakes. The food on both of the trips that I took, both in the Wind River Range and then on the Mummy Range trek, in some instances better than what I'm going to eat at home.
What would be a dinner? Can you remember some of the dinners that you had?
I want to say pad thai, that we actually had pad thai in one of the evenings. I'm going to have to think about that one, Kit. I don't remember. I just remember each night just being really satisfied. And I know that sometimes, people are like, well, after you've backpacked during the day, it doesn't really matter what you're going to eat. It's just going to taste like the best thing you've ever eaten. Their food really just was phenomenal. But I, for the life of me, I just can't remember exactly what we were eating.
That's not a problem. In fact, put another plug in here too. I have an episode that just came out on nutrition on the companion podcast, Adventure Travel Show podcast, where I teach you the how-tos of adventure travel so that if you don't have wildland trekking to fix your gourmet meals, to give you an idea of what you can put in your pack so that you will have the energy you need to get through the day. So, but it sounds like you didn't need my podcast episode there because you were well taken care of.
I was very well taken care of, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to listen to your podcast.
So how hard was this one compared to the Wind River?
I found this one to be quite a bit easier than the Wind River Range, but I would still, I believe it's rated a 4. And so I would say 3, and if they were to give half stars, I'd say 3.5 to 4. This one, actually, you went to a higher elevation than when we were in the Wind River Range. But being that it was 5 days, and I just felt that the distance that we traveled over the course of those 5 days was less than the Wind River Range. There was the one particularly long day where, we were just going up and up the whole time. And then in that day, we left the trees. We went across, the meadow that I was talking about a little bit ago, and then across the boulder field. And we ended up at the highest elevation. And interestingly enough, even though we were, in the middle of nowhere, which I always say, we had cell service. And so we were able to FaceTime some of our family members and say, we're at the highest elevation that we've ever been at. And the view was just spectacular. It was a lunch spot that we had taken. But there was one day in which we had the choice as to whether we were just going to continue on trail or whether we were going to go visit one of the lakes. And I believe it was the day prior, we visited 2 spectacular lakes, just kind of had hopped from one to the other after we made camp. And they were just so beautiful. And so the following day, when we were given the option to go to the other lake, we were kind of split between those who wanted to go and those who just kind of wanted to continue on trail and head to the next camp. And, we are a group and we do just have one guide. So we did not go to that other lake. And so that particular day was a shorter day. So, which is appealing to some people to have that time to sort of recharge and relax and get to know a particular area better. So I did find it I would say quite a bit easier than the other trip.
And what time of year did you go to the Mummy Range?
That was in September.
Okay. So now are the leaves starting to change then?
They were, I think it was, the aspen trees were just bright yellow. They were beautiful. So it was really a very nice time of the year to go. I don't remember any bugs. I know that as we got lower into the valley on the last day, you kind of felt that heat coming back, but it was quite beautiful when we were up there. I would absolutely recommend. I don't know what time of the year that wildland trekking offers the trip, but September was a perfect time to go.
So I'll put that in the travel planner that will come out automatically with each one's newsletter and in the show notes as well. So I'll look that up and get that out there for everybody. And then now the Mummy Range has Colorado's only quote unquote wild and scenic river, which is a special denotation they do for rivers. Oh, and before I forget, did you see much wildlife? I hear there's elk and moose in the area.
Yes, so we heard that as well. And we saw prints, but we unfortunately did not get to see the wildlife again. And that was really disappointing. I have yet to see a moose. And so they were talking about, all of the elk and the moose, like you're saying, that are in the area. We did not see any on the trek. But interestingly enough, when we got back to the hotel that last day in Estes Park, this whole herd of elk just came across this pasture that was right next to the hotel. So I got to see them. I just didn't get to see them on the trek.
No, that was my first time to Maine. I was hoping to see a moose, and finally we're driving home because we drove up there to hike. We see two juveniles crossing the road. I was like, I guess that counts. So I get that.
It counts.
It counts. And so how was you said your weather was good, or we talked about the Aspens. How was your weather?
The weather was beautiful the entire time. Just like perfect hiking weather. I don't remember that we had to pull out our rain gear at any point. You know what? I take that back. I think that we had a shower come through just as we were setting up camp the one night, but it was short-lived. I think that was the same night that we had that really nice night show, the sky show. And I'm trying to think that when we were going across the pasture, we did have a storm come through too, but again, short-lived and very windy too. But the whole time it was just beautiful.
Is there something you wish you'd known before you'd gone there?
I wish that I'd known or maybe paid more attention to the itinerary and that we weren't going to go to the lake the one day. I would have liked for that particular day to be a bit longer or to have that be a mandatory part of the trip, just because, you are dictated by the group. And I was one of those who would have liked to have gone to the lake to see that, because you do train for a reason and you're out there for a reason. And there's plenty of time to sleep when you get back home.
Right. And perhaps too, with a larger group, you'd have had two guides and you could have split up.
That's exactly right. And I do know that that's what they'll do in a lot of instances. It's, up to the group. And as you're sitting, half can kind of go along with the one guide while the other half stay back at camp. So I would have liked to have seen it. I did get to see the two the day before. But yes, I would have liked to have known that. I don't know that it probably would not have changed my decision to go, but it kind of, you don't have false expectations.
And so you had said that the Wind River Range was up in your top 3. How does this Mummy Range compare?
I would say more in the middle and upper middle, I suppose. I really loved the area. I am a fan, however, of seeing things that are very different. So the Wind River Range was entirely different and had a different feel to it. With the Mummy Range trek, I definitely did see, things that I don't see over here on the East Coast. But, you're in the trees for part of the time. And then you're out in the open. And then, of course, going across that boulder field, that was quite spectacular too. Being that it was just the 5 days, you usually have that one day that you're getting in and then the one day that you're coming out, which is usually in the trees. So just the 3 days, because that was a shorter trip, I always say that it falls more in the middle for me. But all of it together, leaving the airport, doing the scenic route into Estes Park, seeing and experiencing Estes Park, as well as the trek itself, makes me want to go back to Colorado and do more exploration because it just is so beautiful. So overall, it was a wonderful trip. And again, I loved the guide too. I have already spoken with her about potentially doing some more wildland trekking trips into the Grand Canyon, which she leads.
Now, Estes Park, is that something you would recommend somebody a couple of days to spend there in addition to doing this hike?
Absolutely. The whole area is just so beautiful with just these great big rock formations. And I have a cousin who lives out in Colorado and he says, oh my gosh, I love Estes Park. It's got a really neat vibe to it. And I know that the Mummy Range was just, one area of hiking in this whole area. So I would go back and would definitely recommend it to others to go explore as well.
And I think one reason Wildland does the Mummy Range too is because it allows you to really be away from the people. Things can get so crowded today. If you go to the national parks now, it's bumper to bumper. But this way you're out totally by yourself.
Yes, you really are. I've gone into Utah to Zion National Park, and some of those parks, as you're stating, they sort of feel like an amusement park because there are so many people who are going into Yellowstone and seeing Old Faithful. With this park, you don't feel that way. You really are off the beaten path and get to have that true backcountry experience.
Now, were you on a trail that's marked that somebody could do this if they had some good backcountry skills, or would you recommend they go with a guide because it's not marked, or how's all that look?
It was a mix. And so I would have answered, yes, go out there on your own until the long day that I was talking about where we were going across, this great big pasture area and then the boulder rocks. There was no trail. We just kind of had to make our way through this whole area. And I mean, maybe it exists on a map. I guess it exists on a map, but there were no trail markings. And when you're in an area so vast where you really just sort of see the same thing in both directions, it's also difficult to place yourself, even if you were to have a map in terms of landmarks. So I personally would say go with a guide.
And in the backcountry, I want to be with a guide. I want somebody that knows that land.
I do too. And also from the perspective of the information that's going to be shared with you from the guide. You are traveling to an area that you're unfamiliar with, and it's a new experience. So you want someone not just to lead you, not just to cook for you, but also to teach you, to explain to you why the land looks the way that it does, or the different animals in the area, the vegetation, the history behind the area. And so having a guide, it's a package to walk away, not just having had that experience and seeing all of that beauty, but to walk away with more knowledge about the area as well. I think that that's key.
I would agree. And speaking of the history, the reason it got the name Mummy Range is the first visitors to the area thought that the profile looked like an Egyptian sarcophagus, or Egyptian mummy, whatever the word is. So that's the rationale, because it looks like one of those King Tut kind of tommy things.
Okay, I was not aware of that.
Thank you, Wikipedia, once again. Any favorite memory, like when you tell people about this trip, what's your favorite go-to story?
Probably the evening in which the sky was just beautiful. And so we were sitting over this crevice, just in the land, like you were saying, kind of just got torn apart, I guess, by the volcano. That particular evening will always stick out in my memory, because when everyone becomes quiet and is just sitting there lost in their own thoughts and watching the sky and looking out at all of the different scenery, it's impactful to you. And we sat like that for hours. And that was a really special time in a really special area.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And like I said, even your photo, you can send it, but it still won't be the same.
Exactly. It won't be.
Well, you just have to take your word for it. Any final thoughts about things we should know about the Mummy Range?
I guess just do it. Just go out there and do it. I feel like you've asked some very good questions in order for people to get the feel as to whether this is the right trip for them or not. I have stated before, I love photography. I did come away with more keepers from a photography standpoint from this trip than I have from others, just because it is so beautiful.
Very nice. So what's next on Paula's radar for adventure travel?
So the John Muir Trail, I'm going to do that in August. So that'll be 23 days of backpacking, which will be the longest backpacking trip I've ever taken. I'm really looking forward to it, but I'm also apprehensive. And I also am looking at next year, perhaps going to Peru and doing a long distance backpacking trip out there, perhaps the Bhutan and maybe Bolivia.
If you go to Bhutan, I can recommend the guide that we used there because I went to Bhutan. Was it last year ago spring? So wonderful trip. And actually, I'm going in October of next year, but to the more tropical areas.
That's one of the ones that I'm looking at right now. There's a couple of different ones that are being offered, and I'm kind of narrowing it down. But I can do 2 trips per year usually. And I'm really torn between this Peru trip and the Bolivia one. They're both on my radar. The altitude of flying into Bolivia, that's the highest altitude airport of any in the world. That has me a little bit nervous about it. And then Bhutan. So those are the top 3. So I'm not sure. Do you have any podcasts on them?
I do, as a matter of fact. I have 2 on Bhutan. I'm interviewing Bolivia soon, so that will be out sometime this fall. And there's a little bit of Bolivia too on the Peru adventure. So I'll put links to all those in the show notes for you, and I can certainly email them to you in the meantime. In fact, are you going to be doing Machu Picchu?
Machu Picchu would be an add-on if I did it. It's not actually part of the trip, but if you're that close, you got to go see it.
You might as well, right? And even if you don't, I guess you can bus up to it. But I think the 4-day trek, anyhow. So I'll get you some information on that too, because that and the Mont Blanc in Europe are the 2 most popular podcasts I've done. Until this one, of course, Paula.
Okay. I've done the Tour de Mont Blanc too. That's quite beautiful as well. But I would love to learn, more about different areas from some of your podcasts so I can help kind of make a educated decision about what I want to do next. That sounds good.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming back on, and I'd love to have you come back. You have some great stories and really flesh out what the places look like. So I'm anxious to keep up on your travels.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Kit. I really appreciate it and enjoy spending the time talking with you about these trips and reliving them.
While we were waiting for the recording to upload onto my computer, I asked Paula if she'd come back on the show after she did the John Muir Trail this August. And so we are going to chat sometime late fall when I get back from my trip, and we'll get that out probably in late winter, early spring. I'm excited about that. That's a very challenging trail. It's also very difficult to get a permit to go on it. So we're going to learn how she's done that and how that whole thing works, because it's supposed to be a spectacular adventure. So I'm super stoked to hear about all that. In thinking about today's interview with Paula, I want you to notice one thing about that, a couple things. First of all, if you have not been to the website, activetraveladventures.com, you want to go check out the photos, because as we said a couple times during the show, landscapes photos just don't do justice to what you actually see. If they are anywhere near as beautiful as the photos that she submitted to go on the webpage, I really, really want to go here. It is really pretty, and I love the idea that you're totally out there and you will feel so small and you won't see any people. I just think that would be just an extraordinary experience. I like too, and I want you to notice too, is she keeps stepping up. So the activities and the challenges and stepping herself a little bit out of that comfort zone. Doing the John Muir, a 20-some-odd day backpacking trip from doing the 7-day that she did with the Wind River. So she keeps up on her game, which I see more and more people doing as they get more and more into adventure travel, because it just gives you such a good feeling about yourself. And so I encourage you to get out there and take that next step, push yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone, because you're going to love it. And funny enough, I didn't realize this when I was talking to Paula, but the next episode that comes out on this podcast is going to be Bolivia. And that adventure was so extraordinary and we went so long, I'm going to break that into 2 parts unexpectedly. And so coming up in 2 weeks, we're going to start the Bolivia adventure. So Paula, listen out for that, and all of you listen up for that. That should be super fun. And then next week on the companion podcast, the Adventure Travel Show podcast, we're going to explore how you learn how to backpack. I don't do a lot of backpacking on this show because a lot of people don't want to carry the weight. But for those of you that do want to learn how to do that and what's involved, stay tuned for that next week. And then I'll see you back here on the Active Travel Adventures podcast on Bolivia. I want to give a shout out to Noma, who wrote to tell me that she's been binging on the show, which I thank you very much, Noma, and also to congratulate her for stepping out of her comfort zone and doing her first solo adventure last year. And that went so well that this year she's going to go to 2 countries on her trip. And also for Casey, who's plugging away in Colorado and listening to all the episodes, and he's recommending that we all get to Norway. So I'm going to look into finding some more hikes in Norway besides the St. Olaf's Way that we covered recently. And also out to Bill, who's done several long-distance hikes, and perhaps I can get him on the show and tell us about some of his adventures as well. So anyway, I appreciate everybody writing in. It means the world to me when I do get your emails. And I got a favor to ask you. I'm still trying to figure out where I want to go next year, and I'd like your suggestions. So if you wouldn't mind popping me an email at kit@activetraveladventures.com. Let me know some places you'd like me to cover. I'm looking for some inspiration, and let me know where you've been and a little bit about yourself. I love hearing from you. Until next time, thanks for listening. This is Kit Parks. Adventure on.